All my players are hurt. Half my team is on bye. I really just want to tell you, suck it up, get over it, you'll be fine. I'll do you one better. How about I tell you which players you could still find on the waiver wire that might help you not only this week with all those teams that are off, but also in the future. Here are some of the top players that you can stash and probably get for nothing on the waiver wire. First, a quick reminder, it costs you nothing but a second of your time to click that subscribe button. If you haven't done it yet, help us out. We're on the way to 100K. We want you to be a part of it. Let's start out with your first priority. And all right, you may not be able to get Tez Johnson as easily anymore because everybody saw what happened. The Monday Night Football, Mike Evans, broken collarbone, rough break, not just for him personally, but also for a team that just cannot stay healthy, specifically at the receiver position. We know Chris Godwin's still, we don't know when he's going to come back, and Emeka Egbuka at least is back. They need something else. They need somebody else to fill in there. Tez Johnson seems to be the guy with the most upside, which is why I mentioned him last week on this very series. But like, this is the week where he's a priority ad, especially if you're losing Evans on your team. Now it's ironic because we thought that in week 7, Cameron Johnson would be the guy to focus on because it was assumed that Mike Evans was going to actually play the whole game and that Emeka Egbuka wouldn't. So of course it got flipped. Didn't think that Evans would break his shoulder and that Egbuka would actually play and play the whole game. But because of that, now the situation is reversed. Cameron Johnson plays a little bit more in the slot. Tez Johnson, last week we saw he played 54% of his routes on the outside. He, in this offense, will be more likely to take the place of Evans. Now, it's not just going to be him, but honestly, they are so down bad at that position, he's going to be out there a lot more than we ever thought. And from what we saw last week, he was the go-to. As soon as Evans was out, Tez Johnson got 9 targets in that game. I mean, only Egbuka and tight end Cade Otton were more heavily involved and more productive, but Tez Johnson still did something. And now we got back-to-back weeks with a touchdown. So this is a player who has some big play potential, but he's getting involved. He's not just relying on 1 or 2 deep shots. He's actually getting targeted pretty heavily, and that's just going to have to ramp up. It's nice to know that you can get a player who's in a great offense, got a good quarterback, and makes those big plays. He's averaging 17 yards per reception so far. And so I will admit, this is less of a stash and more of an ad that can go under the radar in your, maybe I don't want to say casual, but let's say less competitive leagues. In a lot of leagues, yeah, he might get picked up through waivers, but not everywhere because not everybody even knows who Tez Johnson is. Now everybody knows who Jaden Higgins is. He was a second-round pick. He's on the Texans. Was going to be this starting receiver to start the season opposite Nico Collins. But, at this point, nobody has Jaden Higgins anymore because he's done very little. It looked like he might be taking a step forward. We saw he actually scored his first touchdown a couple weeks ago, had a decent amount of involvement against the Ravens in that defense. And then we had the bye, and then we have the Texans looking just like they did in the beginning of the season, which is to say, not just losing, but doing nothing through the air. But the biggest concern right now is the fact that on Monday night, Nico Collins suffered a concussion, or at least he's in the protocol. And so now his availability for week 8 is going to be up in the air. They've got to do something anyways, right? They've got to change up this offense somehow. It is just not working. It's only logical we get these rookie receivers involved. Christian Kirk has been out most of the season, and if Nico is out, they've got to try to go to Jaden Higgins first and foremost. Now, Jalen Noel was more involved this past week because, like I said, Kirk was out, and he's that slot guy. But if Nico is out, this is all Jaden Higgins. Now, on paper, it's not a great matchup for Houston, specifically for a guy like Higgins. The receivers here, 49ers have allowed the 11th fewest fantasy points to wide receivers, but they are 23rd in terms of yards per target to wide receivers. But keep in mind, they don't have Fred Warner anymore. They don't have Nick Bosa anymore. This defense is struggling to stay healthy, just like their offense, just like every 49ers team. And so this could be a good spot for Higgins, but again, he's just going to have to get the target volume. This is a time to stash him because even though Nico, again, like I said, we don't know what his status is going to be until the week is over. Even if Nico plays, they've got to try to go to Higgins and have somebody else make some plays here. And then one more young receiver. You probably know Jalen Coker, and I mentioned him a couple weeks ago. It was a smart stash because he was going to come off of IR, and he was finally activated last week. And it was a letdown because, well, he did a whole lot of nothing. Only 2 targets, and that route participation was at 47%. Xavier Legette had his best game. He was targeted over and over again. Looked like Legette's breaking out. We know they already got Ted McMillan. So now it's like, why would we be interested in Jalen Coker? Oh, yeah, by the way, starting quarterback Bryce Young, high ankle sprain, he's out for the time being. But I am still keeping faith in Jalen Coker. It's not just because we want Coker to be a thing. Right? Coker can be a thing here. He's going to be the starting slot receiver. That is a valuable role in this Panthers offense. And even though Bryce Young hadn't been targeting the slot quite as much as in previous years, he didn't have Coker back. Yet Hunter Renfrow had that one magnificent game and then has just dropped off, right? Because he used everything he had left in that one game, and he's not even activated last week now that Coker's back. So you don't have to worry about that. Coker will have a role here. I think they're just easing him back into action. And well, I will say I can't promise you that Andy Dalton is going to be any better than he was last year. Remember, he had a couple games where he looked pretty good. In fact, he was better than Bryce Young, but eventually tailed off. He's not going to be there forever. This is an ankle. Bryce Young will be back in a couple weeks, and Dalton probably for a couple weeks will use whatever he's got left in the tank and air it out. They have 2 tough matchups these next couple of weeks. First here with the Bills. Maybe this works in favor of the passing game because they'll have to pass it a lot. I got plenty more stash recommendations for you. First, a reminder that you can always ask your waiver wire questions. Start sit, trade, anything you want about your fantasy football team. Ask us on Draft Lane. It's a free download from the App Store or the Google Play Store. And if you use code ENDGAME, then you get 10 free points that you can use towards your first couple of questions. Now, we're always looking for running backs with upside. Speculate a little bit more here. The trade rumors are just going to increase. And it's possible where there's smoke, there's fire. Of course, it doesn't always happen in the NFL, but the Jets are going nowhere fast. Brees Hall, one of those holdovers from the previous regime. We heard a lot of rumors, but even before the season, that maybe Aaron Glenn wasn't sold on him. Said all the right things. He's been the guy, but maybe he's not the guy for the rest of this season with the Jets still looking just to win a game. Look, I don't necessarily assume it's going to happen, but if Brees Hall gets shipped out, I guess it's Isaiah Davis as the RB1 here. No Braylon Allen, basically after the season, he's on IR. Brees Hall is gone. And what else do they have? I think they signed like Khalil Herbert to the practice squad. And they'll probably find somebody else to do something, but Isaiah Davis will get a lot more run. And so just as a running back who gets touches, he's got to have some fantasy value, even as bad as this team is. But we don't know a whole lot about what Isaiah Davis can do because he's got all of 10 rush attempts this season, had 30 all of last season. So presumably he could get the job done in a pinch, but he's actually a pretty effective receiver. That's mainly how he's used. For those who recall Ty Johnson, who used to be a Jet and now is with the Buffalo Bills, similar type of player who catches those dump offs, could do something a little bit, get you a floor in PPR. I can't pretend there's a high ceiling here, and not just because he's on the Jets, but just because Isaiah Davis is not one of those dynamic type of running backs. But again, if Brees Hall does get shipped off, you got a guy who's getting touches. That means there has to be some value. Now, there are also trade rumors surrounding Alvin Kamara and the Saints, and it seems pretty obvious that's not going to happen because, first of all, Alvin Kamara pretty much squashed that, saying he'd just retire, something along those lines. Look, he's not getting traded, but especially now because their backup running back, Kendre Miller, is out for the season. And there was some thought, he was kind of eventually take over here. He was starting to see his workload ramp up. Now he's gone. So who else is going to fill in that role, not only as the RB2, but to give Kamara a breather? It looks like it's going to be 6th-round pick, Devin Neal out of Kansas. For those not familiar with Neal's game, he ran for 3 straight 1,000-yard seasons at University of Kansas, but also was involved as a receiver, caught 20 or more passes in those 3 straight seasons as well. Not exactly what you call a burner, not great straightaway speed, but he's kind of a do-it-all back, and he does have an 83rd percentile burst score. I mean, he can get through the hole and hit it. Obviously we have seen nothing of what he could do in the NFL level, so it's hard to speculate too much here. We'll see if his game does translate well, but this is a guy that you feel like isn't just kind of a one-trick pony. In fact, he profiles more as a kind of a do-it-all back. Not saying he's going to replace Alvin Kamara. Kamara's still going to be the guy and pretty much the workhorse there from now on. But don't be surprised if you start to see Devin Neal's name in the box score a little bit more often. And so I wouldn't feel comfortable starting or streaming him as of yet. But we'll see if this turns into something. Now we finally saw Chimere DK's name in the box score in a positive way. 4 catches, 70 yards, and a touchdown, his first as a receiver in the NFL. I say as a receiver because let's face it, it's only a matter of time before he houses one as a return man. This is what he's been known for. It's funny because, anytime we've been asked about Chimere DK this year, which you might be surprised that we've been asked about him, is in one of these leagues. There are some leagues that exist that actually count kick returns and punt return yardage, and you get points for that. I mean, why not? It's part of the game, makes sense, just like kickers. If you have kickers, why not have kick returners? And in those leagues where kick return yardage counts, DK is basically a must start. And why not? He's leading the NFL in kick return yardage at 816. And he had that long return a few weeks ago where he almost scored, but was brought down right before the goal line. It's just a matter of time. Now, if you don't play with kick return yards, who cares, right? But the point is, this is a guy that they drafted for that role, but he's also having a role on offense that is now slightly expanding. They got him so he can run those deep routes, make those big plays. It worked last week, got that long touchdown. Yes, this is boomer bust. If this reminds you of Rashid Shaheed, it should. And now he's not there yet. He's not the type of receiver Shaheed is in terms of route running and trust in the offense. So it's going to take some time, but that's the most comparable player you can think of in terms of how he plays. I mean, this guy has blazing speed to be sure. Unfortunately, he's trapped in the Titans offense, and that's what limits him. But keep in mind, Calvin Ridley has been out with a hamstring injury, and so this was going to open up the door for a guy like DK. I'm not saying that you can trust him to do anything, and I mean anything at all. He could give you a 0 if you decide to flex him, but on a week where there are 6 teams on bye and you need that potential home run play, he could hit it again. Now, while it's hard to imagine a whole lot of teams are clamoring to trade for a guy like Calvin Ridley, it's possible. The tight end Chig Okonkwo, he might get moved, which is why I mentioned Gunnar Helm last week. And you saw Helm was more involved than Okonkwo. Could be similar. Again, DK will never be a target hog. Just he will not be that type of receiver. But don't be surprised if he does start to get at least somewhat of a steady stream of targets. Now, a receiver that you've barely seen in the box score last couple of weeks, but at least he's been there, is Trey Harris. Yeah, it's all about those 3 receivers they already have, but plus the tight end, the rookie, Oronde Gadsden II. I mentioned him several weeks ago. That's a very clear example of a player who went from a stash to a priority add if you need a tight end this week. I'm not sure Harris will get there because, again, they have 3 good receivers already, but injuries happen. You know how it works. And rookies do tend to increase their productivity, at least their involvement in the offense as the season goes on. Maybe it happens for Trey Harris because, look, even the last couple of weeks, 4 catches for 27 yards, 2 catches for 23 yards. It's not impressive, but it's a step up from the previous 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks where he had 0 catches. He was drawing praise from coaching staff. I mean, they really like what they've seen, so that's why they're trying to make an effort to get him involved, even though he's competing for targets with guys like Ladd McConkey, Keenan Allen, Quentin Johnston. And so, again, hard to find him carving out a big role just yet. This is the type of player that you stash and hope that, things just break right for him. Now, we gave the Chargers are going to play the Vikings, and we are definitely not going to see J.J. McCarthy at quarterback. He's just not ready yet physically. Is he going to be ready next week? Who knows? Is he ready mentally? That's another good question because when last we saw J.J. McCarthy, he was looking pretty awful. In 2 full games, we've seen exactly 1 good half of football from J.J. McCarthy. It was the second half of week 1 where he led the Vikings back against a pretty bad Bears defense. And then, week 2 it just all fell apart. And then we got that injury that we found out about after the game. Now, obviously, this was a serious injury, so maybe we can excuse what we saw because he was playing through it. This happened right away. So JJ McCarthy has been out a while, and you got to wonder, is he able to pick up the nuances of this offense? Is he really going to even be better than Carson Wentz? Let's just ask that. It doesn't sound like I'm setting the bar very high, but still, we have seen very little examples of success from McCarthy as of yet. You've got to wonder, is he made for the NFL? It's worth finding out if you're in a super flex league because this is a Kevin O'Connell offense. This is Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison out there running routes. I mean, look, they drafted this guy in the first round for a reason. You've got to give him a chance. Now, again, single quarterback leagues, no. No, you need to wait and see what he can actually do first. I'm talking to the Superflex crowd. I'm talking to those who can run two QBs in their lineup. JJ McCarthy, he's got to be stashed somewhere. Feels like we might have to wait at least another week, possibly two. But come on, I think they have to see what they've got with McCarthy. Wentz has shown enough. And a player who's getting all the hype in the preseason, dare I say, no player was more hyped and overhyped than Dante Thornton. Look, to some extent, I kind of bit here. Again, I'm just talking my best ball drafts. In redraft, I didn't touch Dante Thornton. But in best ball, sure, this is the type of player you take a chance on. What if he's the next Megatron? And I say that because a lot of people were actually making that comp. I mean, yeah, the physical attributes, of course. There's a reason why we made this comp. Not I did. Dante Thornton was the fastest receiver who was 6'3" or taller in terms of his 40 speed at the combine, ran a 4.3. And there are some analysts who just took that and ran with it, saying, what if this is the next Calvin Johnson? Well, there are still plenty of things Dante Thornton doesn't and can't and probably will never do that Calvin Johnson did. But he doesn't need to be that, right? He just needs to be serviceable. Is this going to be somebody you can use at any point in fantasy? So far, the answer has been a pretty hard no. But then again, that's kind of applied to every Raiders receiver. So why talk up Thornton now after doing a whole lot of nothing and the Raiders just seemed like one of the worst offenses and Geno Smith looks like, man, his time might be up? Well, there is the chance that Jakobi Meyers gets traded. In fact, just went on the record saying that he does want to still be traded, right? It doesn't mean he'll get traded, but he's all for it. He's ready. Why wouldn't the Raiders at least entertain the idea? And because he missed last week with an injury, you know what? Dante Thornton's snaps have already started to go up. Now, like I mentioned, with a guy like Jameer DK, this will be kind of a boom bust pick. He's not necessarily going to be a target hog, even if Meyers is out of the equation. You're going to hope for that home run, that big play, but certainly he's got the speed and the size to make those plays if he gets the chance. And then finally, now I don't feel obligated to squeeze a tight end in here, and nor do I feel obligated in any way to talk about the Dolphins and that offense. Well, look, where there are injuries, there are opportunities. And so with Darren Waller out, of course, Tyreek Hill, you're going to need to throw to somebody because they'll probably still be losing frequently. Tight end might be Julian Hill. Yes, Julian Hill. This is a third-year tight end, undrafted free agent out of Campbell University or college, one of those. And Julian Hill is the type of player that shows up once in a while as needed, gets praised by the coaches, does all the right things, right? Got some athletic ability, doesn't necessarily stand out. This is really just, just a matter of necessity. They're going to have to throw it to somebody. Okay, if Darren Waller is almost surely out for week 8, could extend beyond that. He's been labeled week to week with a pec injury. Again, there's nobody else. I mean, really, D. Eskridge, Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, those are the receivers after Jalen Waddle, who Waddle himself, for what it's worth, still putting up big numbers most weeks. Every week, it feels like this guy goes to the sideline with something, right? A shoulder or, he's limping. There's always something, right? Julian Hill might inherit some targets. You got to be pretty desperate here at tight end, to be sure, but just keep an eye on things. All right, happy stashing. Go ahead and grab any of those players that might be useful to your fantasy team. If you have questions, we're always here for you. We do the live streams. We got the Draft Lane app. But of course, we got the videos for week 8 in this playlist.